Well, this is live from the Vatican. I'm Raymond Arroyo, and if those bells are ringing at St. Peter's, you know it's the start of the show. A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and around the world. The conclave is just one day away, and there still seems to be no clear front-runner to be the successor of St. Peter. We're hearing some names from the electors themselves, and we'll run those down for you with our conclave crew later in the show. And we'll also answer your questions, which you can send to conclave@ewtn.com. Later, I'll introduce you to more of the papabile candidates, just so you're familiar with the men who could be Pope. Joining us to discuss the oft-mentioned Roman Curia. Now, he's a veteran here, and we keep hearing that the cardinals would like to reform the Curia, and many of you don't know what the Curia is. He formerly worked at the Congregation for the Clergy. He's now a pastor at St. Stephen's and Good Shepherd parishes in New Orleans. My friend, Monsignor Chris Nolte. Oh, it's good to have a fellow New Orleanian on set. But you brought me no coffee and chicory, no beignets.
I have some Tony Chachere's.
Well, we're going to get to that in the next segment. Tell people, what is the Curia? There's been so many, we've gotten a lot of questions because the cardinals have said it's in need of serious reform.
Yeah. Well, it's evolved over the centuries, but it's basically the people who assist the Holy Father in his ministry. Mm-hmm. Every diocesan bishop has his own Curia that helps him in his own diocese. But the Curia here, I found, although all analogies fail in some respect, you can kind of analogize it to the departments in the executive branch of our government. Uh-huh. If the Pope is the supreme lawgiver, the supreme judge, and the supreme executive, and then the Curia is really his executive branch. There's also the courts, the Roman Rota and the Apostolic Signatura, but the 9 congregations and the different pontifical councils and commissions that make up the Curia assists the Holy Father in his work throughout the world.
Monsignor, we keep hearing about corruption in the Curia, corruption in the Vatican. How deep does this go, and what does that really mean?
Well, I'm not sure when you say corruption. There's going to be individual priests who are all sinners, like all of us are. And if they're maybe put into a position where they can have some influence, we might call that corruption. Yeah. However, you have to understand that you know, through the centuries of the Church being here in Italy, the Church has gone through many different models. At times, the Pope was a big landowner and owned most of Italy, the Papal States. At times, the kings would come before him to be crowned, and so the model that we have now is an evolving model, and it will evolve as the Church continues to evolve until the return of Christ.
Now, Cardinal mentioned to me the other night that the problem is really, you can't generalize and say it's the Curia. In his estimation, it's the leadership, he said. There's some key positions that need to be looked at again and maybe reappointed, but that's where some of the difficulty is, and it may just be a management question rather than, deep corruption, which is human. I mean,
yeah, I would say, we have every country has different types of management style. We're living in a world where companies must move very quickly to take the next technology. And so the idea that the Vatican, that the Roman Curia needs to be run like Apple, I think is a misnomer, because many people believe that the slowness, the deliberate nature of the Curia allows for better decisions. And the truth is that the Church has what we call subsidiarity. We like when decisions are made at the lowest level. Frankly, as a pastor, I don't want decisions I make to have to go to my Archbishop. I take his freedom away from things that he should be working on. So I want to solve everything at my level. But the idea of sending everything up to the Vatican and having them decide it, the Vatican doesn't like it, and so they like to slow things down.
How much of this is Roman culture, the Roman society that is sort of seeped into the walls of the Vatican here?
Well, I think that is part of it. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And
Rome wasn't built in a century.
Right. I had lunch with someone today. We were talking about the University of Notre Dame wanted to come and build a campus here, and so they've acquired some property, and they said we're going to have this built in a year and a half. And he told them, you haven't been in Italy for very long. If you think you can get something done as fast as America, there's a slower pace here. There's a slower, deliberate pace. But in the end, the Italian buildings are not made to last for a century like sometimes in America they are. Right. They're made to last for centuries and centuries. And so the slow building of the church and the slow deliberation of the Curia has something that has served the church for a long time. And so there's not going to be a quick change into an Apple computer model of the church. It'll take time, but I think that a lot of the cardinals and the archbishops are concerned when they don't get responses for a long period of time.
So we're not going to have a kiosk with Vatican geniuses out in the piazza, is that what you're saying?
Well, you know, if you think about the last 15 or 20 years, that the Vatican now has an internet presence, and one of the biggest and best internet presences around. The people try to hack into that computer so often, and they've got one of the most efficient series of firewalls. But the new communication strategy of the Holy Father being on Twitter, on Facebook, these are things that the church needs to, where the church needs to be if it's going to evangelize.
I want to share something with you. The media descended on some cardinals celebrating Sunday Mass. They swarmed their respective titular churches. But aside from some nice pictures, the media covered little of what was said. Now, we attended Cardinal Marc Ouellet's Mass, the Quebec native and head of the Congregation of Bishops here at the Vatican. I wanted to share a few lines from Cardinal Ouellet's homily that jumped out at me, and Monsignor, you can react to this a bit. He said the cardinals that will now participate in the conclave will have the opportunity and will all be invited to confess their sins, to choose with purity of heart, not only to confess their sins, but also to offer forgiveness. The biggest sin is to not forgive their brother, and so we in Lent, to live reconciliation, we must offer forgiveness to those who have offended us at home, in the family, at work, or in other opportunities. Remember John Paul II when he went to prison to offer his assassin forgiveness. Remember Benedict XVI who offered forgiveness to his traitor right before Christmas. We are called to reconciliation and forgiveness from God's Word today. Tell me how this puts in context what the cardinals will be facing and sort of the spiritual backdrop of this solemn and weighty moment for them.
Well, I think first of all, Cardinal Ouellet is probably preaching on the gospel, right, with the prodigal son gospel today, and about how we are called to be like God. God forgives us. We say in the Our Father, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. And so forgiving others is God-like. And I think that when you put that in the context of the gospel and what he's thinking about the next 2 days of entering into the conclave, it's really a call to humility, because true forgiveness involves our humbling our pride.
And it raises a great point. Confessions are available throughout the process while they're in conclave. They have assigned confessors, I think, who take the oath. 90 of them took the oath today. You know, confessors, maids, cooks, other people that will be sort of in the background, but at this conclave. A little news involving Cardinal Ouellet that bears mentioning. He was elected to the particular congregation today. That's the panel of cardinals, including the Chamberlain, Cardinal Bertone, the Camerlengo. Now, that panel will essentially run the day-to-day affairs of the Church in the absence of a pope. The three cardinals elected to the panel today were Antonios Nageb of Alexandria, Francesco Monterisi, I'll get it right, and the Archpriest Emeritus of St. Paul's outside the walls, and Marc Ouellet, the prefect of the Congregation for Bishops. Before I let you go, Monsignor Nolte, tell us what's working on the diocesan level, on the local level, in your own diocese and parish, because we often focus on the corruption in the Curia and this scandal and that scandal. There's actually a lot working, including seminaries, which are up again, vocations.
Well, you know, there's something, we had such a long pontificate with John Paul, and then with the death of Pope John Paul and the new election of Benedict, when I was working here, there was so much attention being paid to the church. Somehow the frequent conclaves are good news for the church, because they allow the church, although you're always going to get journalism that tries to degrade the church, but they allow us to get our message out, and it's really a message of hope. The message that we are saved by a Savior and that He is still here with us through His Word and Sacrament. And so I'm encouraged that our seminary in New Orleans is the fullest it's been since the 60s. The North American College is busting on the seams. You see priestly vocations going up, and just in my own parish, the numbers of catechumens coming into the church at Easter is increasing every year. So there's such great joy. I think that's what we need to, the church, Jesus told us we'd be hated, right? It shouldn't be any surprise that the world hates us, but we're still going to continue to give that message of joy in and out of season.
Fantastic. Thank you for spreading it. And how could you help not spread it, being in New Orleans? And the pastor of 2 parishes, I might add. Thank you for being here, Monsignor.
Thanks so much, Raymond.
Now, when we return, a few more papabile candidates, the men who could be Pope, and the conclave crew will answer some of your questions. I know you have a lot of them. When Live from the Vatican continues. Stay right there. Welcome back to Live from the Vatican. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Joining me on set is the entire conclave crew. Robert Royal, editor of thecatholicthing.org, Father Gerald Murray of the Archdiocese of New York, and Father Roger Landry of the Fall River Diocese. Thank you all for being here. Now, before we get to our running list of the papabile candidates, I want to show you a clip. This is Cardinal Sean O'Malley. He's talking about the qualities he hopes to see in the next Holy Father and what we might expect from the coming conclave.
I don't think the geography is that important. Obviously, where the Holy Father's from is a factor, but it's not the overriding factor in the Church, because it's the Catholic Church, and no matter where you're from, you're baptized and you're a member of the family. So, but certainly we need someone who will continue the thrust of the new evangelization, someone with the personal holiness of life that we see in Benedict, and his ability to communicate the faith with clarity, with joy. Obviously, some of the people that are mentioned are wonderful prelates who would feasibly have the capacity to be the Holy Father, but you never know what's going to happen in a conclave. I don't think anyone expected John Paul II to be elected. That was quite a shock to the world, and so a surprise could come out of this conclave. You never know. So.
You never know. And I think those are the watchwords that we should say about any conversation we have about these candidates. You really never know, despite what we're hearing from the cardinals themselves. React to what we heard early on from Cardinal Sean O'Malley there. This notion that we shouldn't focus on a man's nationality, his race, that's secondary.
Yes, and that's actually one of the beauties of the Catholic Church. We are all equal in the sight of God, where we come from, what our race is, even if we can know how to read. Everybody who's a child of God is treated equally. So therefore, what counts is who can preach the gospel, not who represents a certain group.
Father Landry?
He emphasized that what's more important is who the man is, his personal holiness, also his capacity to preach the good news, not only by his lips, but by his life. That's what they're all looking for. That's what we've been blessed to have over the last century, and that's what we're praying is going to continue with whoever walks out on that loggia.
Bob, the running difficulty with so much of the media coverage is this focus on personality. We're going to have a black pope, we're going to have an Asian pope, we're going to have a Mexican pope. This is really a misnomer, isn't it?
I think that it's natural for the media, for the secular media, to look in that direction because that's how they judge things. Race, class, gender, you know, all this sort of thing. But I'm going to differ a little bit with the rest of the panel because I think,
be the contrarian,
and maybe
Robert.
even disagree a little bit with Cardinal O'Malley, who I think is a wonderful man. We know that the Church is moving into the third world. It's not important that the Pope be a third world, a person from the third world, but I think more and more there's going to be pressure, at least to have people who have experience of the third world, who understand the third world, simply because it's part of your I don't know, your portfolio when you become the Pope. You have to be holy, of course, but the way to bring the holiness to different parts of the world means having the tools as well. So, I mean, obviously this shouldn't be a determining factor, but it's one of the things that's going to be in the mix.
Now, this conclave is going to begin Tuesday morning. Many of you have been asking about the vote breakdown by region. Where do the 115 cardinal electors hail from exactly? Now, this will no doubt have an impact on the outcome of the conclave. Here are the numbers. We put the graphic up for you. Africa has 11 votes. Asia has 10 votes. Europe has 60 voters, 28 of whom are Italians. Latin America has 19 votes. North America, 14 electors, 11 Americans, and 3 Canadians. And Oceania has 1 voter, Cardinal George Pell of Sydney, Australia. What impact, if any, does this have on the outcome of this conclave? Do these cardinals vote as a bloc? Do regions move together? I'll start with you, Father Murray.
It's going to be an interesting reality, because even though North America and Europe constitute, a very important presence, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to vote for someone from their own region. Inspiring figures who have studied in Rome or had some experience from South America, Africa could be picked. We can definitely say that where the church is more mature, the presence has been longer, we're seeing a greater representation of the cardinalate. But, as with the Polish Pope we had back in 1978, there could be a big surprise at this conclave.
Father Landry?
I think when you look at that breakdown, there are some regional issues that would be of concern to cardinals coming from a particular continent, for example.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that one of their own is going to be the best one to address those issues. And it also doesn't mean that they're going to look at exactly the same person as someone who would be able to deliver. As we've all noticed with the USCCB elections, the Bishops' Conference, they don't vote 190 to nothing on every issue. A lot of the times there's vigorous debate, and I'm sure there'll be vigorous debate.
Bob Arroyo, 28 of those voters are Italian. They estimate there are 39 curial cardinals who have votes here. Together, if you take a bit of that Italian vote and you fold it over the 39 votes, not that all the Curia is going to vote as one, but a sizable majority of them may, does that present a block to a candidacy?
Well, we're all trying to figure that out, aren't we? I mean, it couldn't indeed happen that way. It's important to recognize that there are obvious differences of interest within even the Italians. I mean, we know, for example, that there is a bloc that would be very much interested in a figure like Angelo Scola, the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan. We're probably going to talk about this a bit later, but there are also rumors that within the Curia, the Brazilian Cardinal Odilo Scherer is their candidate. So we shouldn't look at these the way we would look at political parties in, say, the United States or Europe, where pretty much people vote for their own candidates. There can be surprising cleavages within nationalities.
Right, and we're going to get into the dynamics and the atmosphere of a conclave and what that does, I think, to these men once they are sequestered away and they frankly leave their friends, the technology, and all of us behind. I do think something happens to them, and many of them have said that, the veterans of this process. Now, I want to introduce you to Cardinal Peter Turkson. We've been hearing a great deal about a pope coming from Africa. This 64-year-old Peter Turkson from Ghana has been talked about since Benedict's retirement. He's head of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace and speaks often about the Church's social conscience and backs world financial reform. He showed a video criticizing Muslims at a recent Vatican synod, raising questions about how he might deal with Islam. He's also been quite vocal about the geographic possibilities of the next pontiff.
If we understand by head of the Church, the Pope and his Curia, so the body that helps the Pope, then would say that there are quite a few people from there. So although the majority is still Italian or European, but we still have a pretty growing number of Africans and people from Asia and Latin America in the Roman Curia. So if you want, at the helm of affairs in the Church, gradually, we begin to see people from non-European, non-Italian background. If the thing is specifically the Pope himself, then I don't think we're too far away from that either.
Your reaction to this boomlet we saw for Cardinal Turkson early on, Father Murray?
Well, I think it's natural, given the growth of Christianity in Africa, that we would consider a cardinal from that continent. I had a lot of African immigrants in my last parish in New York, St. Vincent de Paul, and I was so impressed by the depth of their faith, the vibrancy of their love of God. Cardinal Turkson has curial experience, as we've noted, and it's certainly someone to consider. On the other hand, the likelihood of someone from Africa would seem to be a more future prospect as the Church grows in experience and maturity. But again, surprises to the common wisdom are something we might
Well,
see.
again, we've been hearing over and over and over again, you got to reform the Curia, you got to reform the Curia from so many of these electors. Does Cardinal Turkson fit that bill?
Well, one of the criteria that they look for is someone with diocesan experience, and he was a very successful archbishop in Ghana who also has an experience within the Curia, which he does now as the head of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. So those are some basic paper qualifications. But I think the larger issue about why he would be considered is, practically speaking, Africa has gone from less than 1% to 14% of the Catholic world in just a century. And if you're looking for people with those two criteria I've just described, he would be considered. I don't think that his star is on the rise in terms of stepping out on the balcony behind us, but he is a very impressive prelate.
No, he's an impressive and a very gregarious man. He's sort of the Cardinal Arinze of this conclave. You know, Arinze had all the press around him at that time, and now, you know, you have the same feeling about Turkson, but I haven't heard his name among any of these electors. Doesn't mean he's not going anywhere, just we haven't heard it at the moment. I want to introduce Bob. I want you to react to this. Cardinal Odilon Scherer. He is the 63-year-old Latin America's strongest possibility. The Archbishop of Sao Paulo runs the largest diocese in the largest Catholic country in the world. Scherer is known for prolific tweeting, appearances on Brazil's most popular late-night talk show, and squeezing into the subway for morning commutes. In the Italian media, Sandro Magister identified him as the candidate of the Curial Cardinals here in Rome. Bob Arroyo, your thoughts on his candidacy?
Well, although his name still continues to be in the news, and you know, we see estimates. We see estimates that Scola has about 40 votes.
Oh yeah, these things.
We see estimates that someone like Willette probably has 10 to 15, and maybe Scherer, because of the backing of some of the Italians, has between 20
Do you put
and
any faith
30.
in those reports
I don't
coming out
know.
of Italian
I don't
media?
know. It's all reading the tea leaves, and we don't know what that means. I think the more important thing is we don't hear much, I think we would hear something of this virtually, we don't hear much about Latin American support for Scherer. So whether he has what it takes to go to the distance, we keep saying we don't know, but it's an odd mix, and it has something to do with this fact that we think that there are blocs that are maybe associated with nationalities, and in this particular case it kind of breaks any suggestion of that.
What was reported in the Italian papers today is that you have a Scherer representing the Curial wing of the conclave, and Scola, who sort of represents the more reformist-minded Italians and maybe some American mindsets. How much faith do you put in these kind of showdowns and breakdowns?
I don't put that much faith in it. Certain people are trying to do what we would call in the United States whipping, trying to see where the votes are coming on down. But that's a very inexact science, especially when the cardinals aren't talking themselves. So at certain points, there's nothing stopping from somebody just making up numbers. I think with Scherer, what we've got is, as we have with Turkson, we've got a guy who meets the minimal criteria of somebody who would be credible. Lots of experience running an archdiocese, and in his case, an enormous one. And also he worked here in the very powerful Congregation for Bishops for quite some time, and so he would be experienced in the ways of the Curia, so that he might know what needs to be done, but also they'd know him here. But it also want to make the Curia at the service of the diocese throughout the world. So that's why he's considered as a candidate. But I think, like Cardinal Turkson, his star is not ascending.
No, I keep hearing Willette, Scola, who's the other we keep hearing? Willette, Scola, and O'Malley. O'Malley,
or Cardinal Dolan.
Or Cardinal Dolan, but the Latin contingent seems to like both Willette and O'Malley because of their deep ties. One actually lived there for 5 years. Well, Willette also taught.
He taught in Columbia at a seminary there for many years.
So there's a lot of interaction there, and the church there feels they understand us. So we'll see. We'll see how this breaks. More importantly, tell me about the atmosphere of the conclave. These men are going to enter behind us into the walls of the Vatican City. They'll be situated in the Domus Santa Marta. They won't see anyone. They won't be able to communicate with anyone, just themselves, and they make the procession up to the Sistine Chapel. What does that atmosphere do to a man going into this conclave?
A large part of the atmosphere is recollection. They hear a sermon tomorrow afternoon from Cardinal Gretsch, the Maltese cardinal, and then after some preliminary explanations and questions, they vote. The voting is done in silence. This is not like the floor of the U.S. House or Senate where people are running around and talking to each other. And in between, while people are voting, they're praying or they're meditating. The atmosphere here is guidance from heaven requires an open spirit, a receptive spirit. And I think that's the rules and the customs of the conclave are meant to foster that.
Father, well, let me get Bob in here, and then I'll come back to Father Landry.
Yeah, at least I hope that's the case. I've expressed before my worries about the
leaks.
The security and the leaks, and we'll know by the end of the day tomorrow if we hear what sounds to be some credible breakdowns of how the votes were. Maybe it isn't as impervious to penetration from the outside, but I think it's exactly right that any serious elector is going to come into this with a grave sense of responsibility. This is not like voting for what is the level of the minimum wage going to be.
Father Landry, last word.
So there's always a microculture that forms whenever they're going to be locked in together. Some leaders will start to emerge, etc. The tone the last time, Cardinal Ratzinger said, even though he was the Cardinal Dean, that he felt like a guillotine was coming down upon his head. So that's obviously going to impact, and he needed to be strengthened by some of his brothers who heard exactly what he had said before, reminded him of his own words about JP2 and said, coraggio, take courage, you can do this if you're asked. And so that microculture is going to determine a lot, and none of us on the outside, except in the case that the leaks happen, as Bob continues to believe that they might, if that's going to determine everything, Raymond.
Very good. Fathers, I thank you all for being here. Bob Royal, Father Landry, Father Murray. You want to add one thing?
I have a shout-out.
Oh, you have a shout-out.
I have a shout-out. Today's the 90th birthday of Dr. Alice von Hildebrand. Wish her a very happy birthday. I know she's watching our programs and she's praying for the Cardinals.
A happy birthday to Alice. Before we go, remember my Rome diary can be found at RaymondArroyo.com as well as on my Seen and Unseen blog at EWTN.com. Each day I bring you an insider's take on the important days here in Rome. That is all the time we have. Remember to join us Tuesday for coverage of the formal start of the conclave, the procession into the Sistine Chapel, and the last images of the cardinals until we have a pope. It all begins Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time in the U.S., 4 p.m. here in Rome. It will re-air at 10 p.m. Eastern. We'll continue to bring you the most authoritative and in-depth coverage of this conclave you'll find anywhere. The show always continues on Facebook and Twitter. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. The Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of the site. On behalf of the entire conclave crew and the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Buonasera from Rome. We'll see you tomorrow.